Before I start, there's one word I want to teach everybody. That's not a common word in our language, and it's epistemology. And it's funny, I started telling Megan what this word meant when she was 3, because I wanted her to know. so she recently had it in a class, and she got it right. So epistemology is the study of how you know things, okay? So, and if you do, in fact, know, for sure something. So that both things. But basically, it's how do you know things? Now, intuition obviously falls under that rubric, and so does perception. That's one way we know things, and the logic is another way. We have various reading books is another way. That's called testimony. So there's various kinds, but it's important we learn this word now, because we're going to talk more about it next week, and it's going to be real important. And I feel it's good to have a week to let it gel in your head what epistemology is. Okay, this talk is called Baba in the Future, and it's about materialism. It's about in the 20th century. And I will repeat what I said at the very end of last week, which was people were trying to overcome the problems that were seen as intractable of René Descartes' substance dualism. So substance dualism, okay, and that was that there's two substances, one like spirit substance, which includes thought and mind and your soul and God even, spirit substance, okay, and then that would be over here, and that's where I put our mental trees over here, and our mind is over here. But you can kind of think of that bubble as your mind. And then over here was the real tree, supposedly, which was theoretical, which makes sense if you've seen the videos from the past. And then the first attempt we covered last week, which we're going to finish up on just a little bit, and it's called idealism. And it's the idea that we're going to emphasize mind over matter, okay? So in that one, last week, I said they got rid of this one and they tried to work with just mind. And then this week, as I said, at the end of last week, I said they're going to try matter. Yeah. So this week, they're going to try the opposite thing. They're going to try to get rid of mind. Now, the reason they're doing this is they're trying to get rid of the dualism part, because there was an interaction problem, as I explained, which you can go back to 2 talks ago. I explained the interaction problem of Cartesian dualism. And so they're looking for a monism. Okay. Now, last week we covered the first way to resolve idealism. This week it'll be the materialism. We will see that neither works, and this marks the exhaustion of the methods to resolve this problem using our current way of thinking. And then this will complete this history. This talk will complete the history of thinking about how we perceive and things like that, and the soul and stuff. And next week we will begin to discuss the new way of thinking, but we're going to get start into that gingerly. Now, the last talk went very smoothly, even though I had a lot to cover, because it had a kind of a structure. One thinker would follow up on the thinking of the previous thinker. So it really told a story. That's the Enlightenment of the 1600s and 1700s. But at the end of but this one is not like that. It's more like many unconnected attempts to achieve a single program, which is to find some way to make materialism work without mind, get rid of mind, and to make it monism, which is a respectable thing to do. And that's its only current theme. Materialism, in the most general way, is the absence of mind talk, okay? Sometimes okay, I won't get into that. I don't like getting into anything that'll slow us down. The idea of materialism was always a non-starter, that's my opinion, but we should not ridicule this last Western effort to unify Descartes' substance dualism into a monism. But this is the quote I mentioned that I was going to refer to by Baba, taking the most important words, All these philosophical explanations are confessed, though inspiring, failures. Nonetheless, each such failure is a partial contribution to the knowledge of the beyond. Okay, so it's just nobody's completely wrong. Okay, so interesting. Let me make sure this doesn't cut the butt. Oh, very good. All right. Materialism is not a theory. Most people think it's a theory. The definition's right here in the definition of materialism from Encarta Dictionary, which I like. It's a physical dictionary. It's one of the last physical dictionaries that they did. It's a very unabridged, great dictionary. Materialism, the theory, it's not really theory, you'll see. The theory that physical matter is the only reality and that psychological states will eventually be explained as physical functions. So it's a theory that one day will have a theory, okay? But it states what its objective is. So it's basically, it's programmatic. It has a program, it hasn't really found a way to succeed at its program, but it remains forever optimistic. Which in the previous quote, Baba said, that's the grace of it, the failures. It's instead of being disheartened by confessed failures, others are inspired to make fresh attempts, And Baba does not ridicule that. They actually openly say that if they believe that they'll have a theory, maybe in 100 years. Okay. They state the conclusion they wish to reach, no mind, but never quite find an explanation that makes sense. Now, at the end of last talk, we finished with Kant, Immanuel Kant, and I explained his idealism with the lenses, the glasses. And I want to say what happened between there and the 20th century, because he's the end of the Enlightenment, which is the end of the 1700s, and you have the 1800s in the middle. So what happened in the 1800s? Well, what happened in the 1800s is you had a whole bunch of Germans warmed up to Kant's idea. Basically, they adopted certain fundamental principles that he had said, such as time does not exist, okay, and space does not exist, and certain things. And they still continue to accept those in existentialism, which is called part of continental philosophy, which is a different stream. I'll explain that later. Now, what happened, you had these all these idealists. Each one had another name for his idealism. They called it objective idealism, and they called it subjective idealism, and they had different names. And then Hegel's was absolute idealism, and if you remember, Kant's was called transcendental idealism. So everybody had an idealism, and they wanted to brand it with, his name. And but what happened in this is that, remember the thing in itself? And I said that there can't really be a separation. They can't really have a dualism because Kant said anything that would make a dualism would be in your mind. So in the last talk, that's clear toward the end. But they saw that. And so they said, well, let's just say it's just all mind. So what happened is they meant by mind the individual human intellect. Okay, human reason. And human reason became God. It didn't become God like we know God. It wasn't, but it's like a substitute, which is funny because reason becomes God. There's actually a thing in history of the French Revolution where, I won't say that. Well, they made a paper mache throne at the top of the stairs, and then Pierre, who's the Pierre of the French Revolution, he actually walked, they called it the throne of reason, and he actually traversed the stairs in a ceremony and sat in the chair of reason. But they were kind of going crazy a little bit. The other thing is they hypostatized being, because that's all that they kind of seemed to be, because it wasn't a stuff, there wasn't a substance. So this hypostatizing or making being into a thing, that created a lot of problems in language, because you're using it as a kind of a part of a predicate. So, it's like is. It ends up being confusing. So What happened is this eventually made its way over to England in the 1800s. And it became called British idealism or absolute idealism, and they took it from Hegel. And they were doing the same kind of stuff, and this was the trend of the 1800s. The 1800s was all idealist. The most famous British idealist was F.H. Bradley. This is a quote by Bradley, and it gives a kind of they would eventually, in England at Cambridge, they would rebel against this kind of writing, which was very hard to understand, and even the people who wrote, even Bradley admitted he couldn't make sense of what he was saying. His last book is called Appearance and Reality. By the way, they know about Hinduism by this time. The Hindu Vedas had been translated in the early 1800s into English, by the English. And so all these people were aware of Maya and all this. So it's not like they just didn't know. They were trying to make that work, okay? But this is the kind of language they had. So it has, this is a quote by Bradley, it has the feature of immediacy and self-dependence, for the terms are given to it and not constituted by it. It possesses, again, the character of plurality, and as representing the primitive felt whole, it has once more the character of a comprehending unity, a unity, however, not constituted by the differences, but added from without. And even against its will, the further, I won't go on. It was just, nobody, I don't know anybody who is a Bradley fan. Then, so just because you sound deep doesn't mean you're making sense. They really tried, and it was a very good honest try, but by the time of Bertrand Russell was starting out and teaching at Cambridge, that was the thing. That's what, and Bertrand Russell had to write like that, but he hated it. He was very angry. Then, in 1903, right at the beginning of the turn of the century, these two men rebelled. There was they began a revolt. And this revolt continues to this moment in the West, not including those who continue on with existentialism. When you talk about Camus or Sartre, you're talking about continental philosophy, which doesn't not only is not my area of expertise, but it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. The mind-body problem, for instance, they're not talking about technicalities. It's more poetic. You may find that it can bring inspiration to you. It's good reading. You may find truth in it, but it's not part of our narrative. It doesn't talk about this kind of technical thing. They were not technical. They were more poetic. Now, they reacted against the kind of language of the British idealists, and that didn't seem to them to make any sense, even though Russell had even gotten accolades for his own imitation of it. So he was quite sure it was like pretending, So now, now they rebelled, not just against them. They kind of had forgotten what came before, because they as school boys, they got mad then, and so they kind of ended up rejecting the whole Enlightenment. They felt that the reason that these guys were talking so strange, it was the fault of the Enlightenment. It was all that talk about mind and Berkeley, and it was Kant, and they really said, metaphysics is the whole problem. We're just going to talk not about anything like that, we're going to talk in regular, ordinary language, like, I see a water bottle over there. That's the water bottle. It's a real water bottle, and I know that, okay? Like anything else, it's kind of nonsense. So this is how it began. It wasn't a technical kind of explanation. It just was like, let's talk like ordinary people. And they called it ordinary language philosophy, invented by G.E. Moore. Now, the other thing that they didn't like, and it sort of shapes this whole period of philosophy, which has a name, you'll find out. It's called Analytic philosophy, okay? And we are in the period of Analytic philosophy. It's a broad family of schools that have things in common, but it emphasizes common ordinary language. We don't talk woo-woo, like I use that word a lot. So these are their very titles show that they did not like idealism. See, the titles are The Refutation of Idealism. That was sort of what launched it in 1903 by Moore. They were both at Cambridge, by the way. And I'm pretty sure, I know that Russell was. the nature and reality of objects of perception. Okay? They're trying to explain it by just talking normal. They felt that would be a possible way. In defense of common sense. So that's a water bottle, and that's just common sense, and it's physical, and I know it's there, and that's all there is. And that seemed to be, it excited people that they were getting to talk like regular people again. So, and then proof of an external world. And then Russell did his own version with a longer title, but in 1914 he wrote, Our Knowledge of the External World. Okay? They couldn't really prove the existence of this external world, but they wrote papers with titles like that, which is a common feature. Okay, the new school was called Analytic Philosophy, a family of methods to skirt metaphysics and get away from idealism. It wasn't initially called materialism, but that's what it was. Materialism isn't a positive idea, it is a negative idea. It's not, no talk about mind, but there's no actual positive part. Remember in the Enlightenment, everybody actually made an attempt to actually explain things. These people didn't do that. They really. Although we'll get to some. Now, this is a very funny thing. Moore gave a talk in 1939 at the end of 40 years of teaching philosophy. And he was so frustrated trying to prove the existence of the external world that, and this is that there was a classroom, and he stood there behind the podium. That's kind of a famous thing in philosophy, and he said, "This is my proof of the external world. This is my right hand, and this is my left hand." Okay. The problem with that is that Moore didn't understand the mind-body problem at all. We have followed it, so we understand that that's not, the question isn't, can we perceive things or experience things? It's what is their fundamental nature. So it's very naive. It's almost like I can't even understand the regression in the thinking since the Enlightenment by the time these people. Now, it's funny because this same argument had been made in 1791, making fun of Berkeley. He said, he took a rock. I happen to have a rock very much like the picture in there. And there's a rock. And he said, I refute Berkeley thus. Okay, so that's it. I refute it thus. But again, these people don't understand the problem. I've never understood why they don't understand the problem, but it's a common thing. I don't know what they're talking about. Other people have pointed this out. Now, to show how serious the problem is about the mind-body problem, the skeptical problem, like we've gone over for a couple weeks now, is that even if you could shrink yourself down, because you could do a mind think, well, you think it's something about atoms. It's not about atoms. If you could shrink yourself down to the size of an atom, and you look at an atom, and recently they say that this is a photograph of an atom. I'm not sure. I have the source. I read that just like during the week. So even if you could do that, and you looked at the atom, and you knocked on the atom and went bonk, bonk, which is sort of silly, but that wouldn't solve the problem, because that's not the problem. The problem isn't that we experience. Okay. And not proving we can experience objects. That doesn't prove the existence of the external world for us who understand what we're talking about in this room from the. Now, the assumptions of analytic philosophy I'm going to go over. First one is scientism. Because they were rejecting all things of metaphysics, so scientism is the view. What happened is, we're talking the beginning of the 20th century, okay? What happened in the 18th and 19th century, as we all know, is science came up with all these amazing inventions, discovered all these laws, and was making things like toaster ovens and telephones, and literally, and movie screens, and science seemed to be almost supernatural, almost like it has supernatural problems. And it was decided that that is the right way, because look at the things that they're able to do. We could never do anything. They felt inferior to science. So they said that we should leave all these science problems of like causal problem between mind-body. We should leave that to science. Next week I'll explain why that doesn't actually work. Questions of substance, causation are abrogated to science, and that's called scientism. That's the only avenue to truth, science. So now next is materialism. They all accept that everything is physical, but they never prove that, and they never even analyze what they meant. Okay? Part of the new thing was to avoid getting yourself trapped where you have to explain what you mean or prove what you said. You remember, you're just using ordinary language. So everything is physical, sounds good, so you just say that's the brute idea. They rejection of metaphysics, as I just said. So talk about God, soul, or even internal states is gibberish. It's beneath us. And there was a rejection of epistemology. Rejection, that's why I taught you the word epistemology. Rejection of looking into how we know things. This is a very important feature of analytic philosophy. One of the ways that they're going to get away with a lot is they're going to refuse to examine how they know. And so they would become presumption-based or assumption-based. We have assumptions. And then Bertrand Russell wrote to express this idea, I propose, therefore, always to begin any argument that I have to make by appealing to data which will be quite ludicrously obvious. Of course, it never was ludicrously obvious to several other people. So it's very naive, okay? When you have a taboo against talking about how you know something, obviously it is presumption or opinion-based. Basically, it's not really philosophy at all. Okay, so they have this is because you'll find out why. Okay, continued more features. They deny or attempt to ignore, or they attempt to deflect by talking about something else, conscious experience. Because conscious experience, as you'll see, is a real bugaboo for them. And so, since they can't explain it, they're going to use, wishy talk that basically deflect. Try to keep the subject off the problem. So we have students, for instance, who look very closely at details of, the meaning of a word and language and syntax or something. But when somebody has this problem, you basically deflect away from it to avoid it. The next one is concession. The concession of folk psychology. You'll understand that later. I'm going to explain that later. Pervasive talk of the external world. It's very funny that these people deny, remember, their experience of the church. Okay, they're going to. You're going to see that. They want to deny this, but they're going to constantly talk about an external world. So they're talking about an invisible hidden world stuff, which is very bizarre. It doesn't even make sense within the construct, their own constructs. If you pick up any book in analytic philosophy, on the very first page you will find the word external world, and it's talking about philosophy of mind or philosophy. The very first paragraph. And you'll find it all through every single book. I brought a lot of books here that showed up. All right. There's another thing. Because human minds, you're going to find, don't have intention, because we don't have minds, they assign intentionality to the words themselves. So literally the ink has intention, but no person has any intention. It's a very, very strange, it's completely, doesn't make any sense, I say. And they talk about cognitively meaningful sentences. They don't mean people are being cognitive, have it in their head, because they don't have a head. Okay, all right, so now the first school that I'm going to talk about, I'm skipping some, just briefly. There were other schools, but they were thoroughly, don't have all my books, they were suddenly abandoned. Oh, yeah, I'm not going to sidetrack that. They were abandoned, so why talk about them? But one that's interesting, that tells us a lot, it's called behaviorism. Now, there's a difference between behaviorism kind of has a little evolution. The first behaviorists were sort of like Putnam. No, not Putnam. Like Pavlov. Okay? What they wanted to do is just, they felt that it was talking about inner states like Freud did. That's sort of the 1800s. They're abandoning that. That's European. That's just nothing talk. Okay? We want to be scientific in our talking. Pavlov was a scientist. Okay? But this became philosophy. We want to ignore anything that we can't describe mathematically, quantify, because we felt that's scientific. But if we talk about qualities of our experience, like how a headache feels, well, we don't have headaches because that would require our mind. But to be hungry in a Pavlov's dog means it's salivating. The salivating is what we mean by the hunger. Okay, there's not another hunger, it's just the salivating or other features that you see from the outside of the dog. Well, initially, or happiness is this. Okay, a behaviorist, I had a professor who was a behaviorist with his PhD from Harvard University. He was no slouch. He said, if you had a corpse and you pulled its lips up, it would be happy. Okay, that's how serious they mean it.
And he was allowed to teach at Harvard?
No, he taught with me in Arkansas. Okay. He had his PhD from Harvard. Okay. Now, so initially it was just, let's translate all internal talk into external talk. So when we talk about being, having a headache, let's talk about sweating and going like that, and got it? So we'll just translate the language into that. But eventually it became, no, there really aren't headaches. They really don't exist. People just think they have headaches, but they don't. And I have a joke, a behaviorist joke. And my behaviorist joke goes, am I exposed okay if I stand in the light? Yeah, I'll go over here. My behaviorist joke is, a woman says to her husband after 30 years of marriage, I made this up, because I've never told it before. It's kind of a dirty joke. Okay, so they've been married 30 years, and the wife says, you know, honey, I had to confess something to you that always bothered me, but I've been faking my orgasms for 30 years. And then he says, because he's a behaviorist, he goes, no, you haven't, dear. Okay, so they basically go back, they're doing what Descartes did with dogs. Remember that dogs in Descartes don't have a soul. People, they have their mind can wiggle this pineal gland. If you were here 2 classes ago, they can wiggle this, and then that literally made pipes carrying animal spirits, move your animal spirits, which is fluids, that move and pull your arms and such.
They put Descartes in front of the horse? Never mind.
I'll put him in front of a horse. Can you explain? Okay. So anyway, but a dog, he works the same way, but he doesn't have a mind or soul. So it just, this all works by itself. And you have input and output, kind of like a machine. And this is being readopted in the 20th century. That's what behaviorism is. It's a return to before the Enlightenment. See, Descartes was the beginning, sort of launched the Enlightenment. He's actually in the Renaissance, some would say, I would say. So this is the kind of structure that logical positives believe that reflexes, all behaviors are reflexes produced by a response to a certain stimuli, to the environment. This is exactly what Descartes thought. Now, if this were a dog, you would see that the heat literally heated up the fluid, which actually then caused the arm to move like this. It's very strange. It's completely automated based on mechanical birds he saw as a child in Paris. So there's nothing new in behaviorism, therefore. Matter of fact, they sort of just replaced, if you remember Thales, many classes ago, like in the first class or second class, Thales believed that what motivated us was magnetism. which he saw in magnetic rocks, magnetite. And so basically they just replacing these fluids with electricity. In other words, this has all been thought before. There's nothing really here. Okay, so the next one is linguistic philosophy. It's credited to a person named Wittgenstein, who's considered the greatest philosopher of the 20th century by Time magazine in their 100 most famous men of the 20th century, or people this year. Linguistic philosophy proposes that in wake of science, now we have science and it does everything to do with truth. Okay, that's their business. The only role left for philosophy is analyzing, this is what was eventually adopted because of Wittgenstein. The only role left for philosophy is analyzing word meanings as a form of therapy for people suffering from deep questions. To show them that they don't know what they're talking about, and you literally, it's a trick. It's a deception. You keep asking a question, and then you ask another question to ridicule what they just said, and you work them into a confusion until they submit. And then they go, you're right, we can't ask deep questions. So this is very, very cruel. It's actually a war on anything deep. So this was, Bertrand Russell was very angry at this. He was back there with Moore. He said, what the heck are they doing? He was interested in these deep questions, okay? And I like Russell, by the way. But he called this lazy, and it evades all deep questions. And there's a book, and I have it right here. I wish they had told it to me when I was in school. I had found it years later. It's called Words and Things. Words and Things by Ernest Gellner, with an introduction by Bertrand Russell, where he gives a scathing review of this school that was trending at Oxford in the, I think, 1940s and 50s. This book is written in 1959. Okay. The next one's identity theory. Identity theory, these are the various attempts to deal with, explain things without a mind. So in identity theory is the notion that the brain states simply are what we mean by subjective experience. So if there's like supposedly some electrical activity going on when you're having a headache, the headache is that electricity happening. And now, this began to have problems because they noticed that the brain is very elastic. And you may have read about this because it's been very popularized, that if it is not just one set of firings in the brain that causes a headache, that it's different in different people and different at different times. And some part can be damaged and it starts appearing somewhere else. So, and they could never correlate internal experience with exact places in everybody's brain. By the way, that was never able, they were not able to do that. They found that they have general regions. So this idea that you could actually have a one-to-one correlation was even disproved. So that first one was renamed, in hindsight, type identity theory. The idea that there are types of activity in the brain that are headaches and all the other experiences, happiness, okay? But they're just token. In each, we can only talk about in this moment, what you think you're happy is whatever brain activity is associated with that at this particular moment, but we don't know what it is and we don't need to tell. We don't need to find out. So it's very, very, very tricky. It's just sort of like, whatever is the cause, they're not looking for the cause. Whatever it is, that's what it is. So it's a tautology. A tautology is, all bachelors are unmarried. Okay, so like that. I mean, so the thing that it is the thing that it is. A rose is a rose is a rose. A tautology, something that can't be wrong because it's absolutely meaningless. It doesn't say anything. It doesn't have any real content to the sentence. Now, functionalism, this is actually the current view in philosophy. You run into a philosopher who's teaching, at a university, and his area isn't necessarily, this falls under philosophy of mind. If his area is not specifically philosophy of mind, you go, well, what's your philosophy? He'll inevitably go, functionalism, because that's what's trending, okay? So they don't even know what functionalism is. They have their scripted words that they learn little definitions. Sounds very good when it comes out and he's a big professor, but I'm going to tell you what it is. There's nothing there. Okay, this is functionalism. It was originally called machine functionalism, and it was inspired by thoughts about computers after World War II. They noticed that computers could do things that people used to be able to do, but so could abacuses. Okay, but anyway, then these could do it automatically because they were electric. Okay, so an abacus you have to slide it, whereas these literally sort of acted like little animals. So maybe we were that. Okay, so functionalism turns attention away from explaining how we perceive and toward what people do. It's basically just behaviorism. That's all it is. It is hoped that if all the functions attributed to minds can be explained in physical terms, then what we had been calling mind can be explained away as a linguistic invention. Since computers can perform many of the functions that minds can, it stood to reason that the brain was a computer, and all talk of mind or subjective inner states, happiness, sadness, longing, okay, they were just bad language. What you meant was that you were acting like, okay, but it's basically behaviorism, was truly about such functions. And it's the idea that we're machines or robots. And so I brought a book, and it's called Kinds of Minds, and it's by the very famous functionalist, and the one who's in Books A Million, All Over Books A Million, Top Shelf. These are old books. These are not new books. There's nothing new. There's nothing new. They just keep reprinting this shit. This is called Kinds of Minds by Dennett, and it's basically that, a thermostat is a kind of mind. Okay, so, and then people who are robots are just another kind of robot. So, and that we are robots made of robots. So he says that in that book. We are robots, so for instance, atoms are little robots, unconscious robots, and then they come together and they form cells, which are robots, and then they come together by random ordering through Darwinian evolution, they form these big robots. And that's where you get your artificial intelligence from, that the robots are becoming conscious and everything, because that means they look like they're conscious. All right, but these functionalists do not believe that we're conscious. This is very important. They do not believe we're conscious, but they have a way to pretend that they do. I gotta go back. It's called folk psychology. Okay, I have to explain it to you because I mentioned it earlier, but it goes like this. And this has fooled even academics, okay? They fool even academics with this method. It goes like this. While there are no subjective and external states, that is how regular people talk, folk, okay? So we will make a concession in our writing to talk like we believe that. So we'll talk about being happy and feeling wonder at the world, but it's just folk psychology. They're pretending, well, I'm gonna tell you what they're pretending. It's very funny. Or it's very terrifying, it's kind of more terrifying. We're living in a terrifying time. You know that this thinking was used at Guantanamo Bay to be able to torture people. The waterboarding is not torture. And the way they do it is torture has to be physically observable on the outside. It has to damage tissue. So if you do anything to the person that you can't see, it's like hit them with a telephone book, or put loud noises or sleep deprivation, that can't be torture because it can't be observed and quantified. So that's not torture because that doesn't exist. That's true. Those were behavior psychologists and philosophers with PhDs. Went to Guantanamo Bay and wrote those white papers. And that's why when you hear we're not torturing, that's what they mean. We're torturing right now. So And that's why they played with language and they made torture go away. But those people are, I didn't even heard of
Should have made them stay there for a while.
Oh, thank you. I wish. Well, they will in their next life.
Right.
They will. Now, the behaviorists it's been said that behaviorists feign anesthesia. Okay? They're the people like Pavlov's dog. They say they don't have headaches. My dear, no, you have not been faking your orgasms. I would know. I saw you acting like so they feign anesthesia. Yeah. Okay. Now, functionalists using folk psychology, so talking like getting down with the dumb people, because that's how we talk. They feigning being conscious. They pretend to be pretending to be conscious. This is the worst form of sophistry that the world has ever seen. Sophistry means fake arguments that lead you to basic confusion so you can win. Tactics, strategies, not seeking the truth. It's completely insincere.
Can I ask a
Yes.
question?
Go ahead.
I'm feeling blown away, not by what you're teaching, but
Yeah.
how many people are made to feel dumb by people who don't know what they're talking about.
That's right. And I was made to feel dumb, and I promise you, I felt very, very dumb. And I got all the books. And I tortured myself for 2 years to understand this. Tortured, because it's painful. It hurts. Like, why are you so mean? Why this meanness? And why this deceptiveness? And sometimes in the book they make snarky remarks
Oh, wow.
about, I know this will seem like, I forget what it was, like, sadistic, but now, they literally, I wish I could remember the word they used.
Question.
Pretending to pretend.
Another thought.
Yes.
Baba said that as we're approaching the New Age, all the crap would come to the surface. Do you think this is part? I mean, I saw lust, greed, and anger. I see that increasing. Is this sort of shit also?
This is the underlying seed of that. This is the accepted, what functionalism is, the accepted current, yes. Now I said at an earlier talk, and I don't want to repeat it for time, but philosophy, while the subtlest thing, is the most powerful. Like you don't have the communist revolution without Marx. You didn't have the French Revolution without Rousseau. So what we see is sort of the expression of the underlying consensual view of the world. The underlying consensual view of the world is not just materialistic, as we thought, but it's absolutely psychotic and completely dishonest. And you're being made to shut up by making you, okay.
Do they know they're doing that?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
They do. Absolutely, they do, because they joke about it. No. And maybe some are dumb, they don't. But Dennett does. Dennett is he's the one who wrote Kinds of Mind. This book is called Consciousness Explained. Right now, this is Books A Million. It's like 1990. There's nothing new, okay? There's nothing, nothing's going anywhere, okay? This book just talks for that many pages and says nothing at all. And you get to the back, and a guy read it, poor Baba lover, Tim Garvin. I don't know if you know him. He's a very intelligent man. He said it should have been called Ignoring Consciousness. And then I said, when I read the book, I said it should have really be called Explaining Away Consciousness. Okay, because it's just functions. It's functions. It's just behaviorism. That's all it is. They like to get new names because they get published. Now, Now, this is the current view of our time, functionalism. If you see, this is a ATM machine. Dennett loves to talk about ATM machines. We're ATM machines. Why are we ATM machines? Because just like an ATM machine, you have input, output. Okay? You put in your debit card, you put in some numbers, that's input, and then you get out your money. So it comes out the bottom. And it has some gears like Descartes, okay, that get input, output. So that is a mind, just as much as yours. Yours is more sophisticated and can do more stuff, but Zoom computers will be able to do that too. And whatever it is you're calling consciousness, it'll be able to do that too, because that's not real anyway. You're just deluded. Matter of fact, the view is that, this will sound funny, but you just think you're conscious. You notice the double thing? That's a double bind. Okay. Well, if I'm thinking I don't have to experience. Now, and also the statement, I'm not conscious. Well, how would I know that? Don't I have to look into my experience to determine that? Obviously, it's a lie. But it's just completely hokey. Like, how could an abacus say, I am not conscious? What would it mean? Okay? Like, I have a headache. Like, no. They literally say, we do not have conscious experience, but we'll talk like you do with. Okay, so it's a program of avoiding the subject of experience while appealing to folk psychology. You're being conditioned to believe in AI, it doesn't exist. There's AI, and that computers can do the functions that we can perform. But this idea of conscious robots, which is now all the rave in all these AI movies, like the TV series on HBO now called Westworld, which I actually love because I love all these perverse shows. But it's about, the robots coming to life. It's a spin-off from a movie in the 60s. So that's not new. I mean, this stuff's not new. There's nothing new. Remember 2001, it was like 1968. There's nothing new. Okay, so there's a thermostat. That's a mind. That's functionalism. Now you know functionalism. Now, there's one more school, and then we're done. And a couple of comments, including ones you'll be interested in. Property dualism is they're the last good guys. Okay, they're out there. One of them, the most famous, there's two that are famous, but one of them gets a lot of notice. His name Daniel. I met all these people. I met Daniel Dennett. I met the next one, David Chalmers. David Chalmers recently did a TED talk, and he talked about trying to explain, we have conscious experience, as if we didn't know. Like he's on the stage going, like, we have orgasms and headache. It's like, it sounds funny because the guy's like fighting that we have experience, which is completely crazy making. I mean, it makes you crazy making. That's why you want to go find those linguistic philosophers that'll finally make you give up and finally just go, yeah, well, there's the water bottle over there. You see? That's where they're trying to get you. Give up. No deep thought, no God, no soul, nothing. So, this is the view now they're materialists. David Chalmers is a materialist, and the other one is Thomas Nagel. Thomas Nagel wrote a very famous paper, very influential, called "What It Feels Like to Be a Bat." So they know that we're experiencing stuff. See, these people don't deny. They're the one people that don't deny it. Get it? But they're materialists, 100%. Like they don't believe in a mind. Now, let me explain. They believe that mental events that they admit occur supervene upon physical ones. Now, this is where you get, we are all stardust, we're just stardust gathered together into these robots, But they believe that somehow the mechanics of the matter somehow is causing us to have consciousness, and consciousness is something, sort of like it's a phenomenon, okay? I'm going to explain later that it's not a phenomenon. You're going to find out what consciousness is. They're wrong, okay? But they're explaining it like it's like electricity. You crank a Tesla electric motor, and you're going to get current running out, and then little things are going to move. They think it's like that, okay? But they don't know how it does it because no natural laws are known that can produce consciousness, but this is how they're trying to go about it. And they use words, the way that they avoid giving any kind of thing is they say, well, there's two things. First of all, they use big words for the relationship between the matter and the consciousness, and that is the word supervenience or give rise to. They both mean the same thing. Let me explain. All these words mean is that they cause it. Supervene, when something supervenes on something, like you put together a electric motor and then the hand flaps, it's supervening on all the parts. But they're saying as far as the closest they can get is saying it's a cause, give you a big word for cause. Supervene is just a big word for cause. Okay, so naive assumption that one day scientists will figure it out. So they're not even trying to figure it out. I'm going to show you some. So now here's the break. They go literally, I heard David Chalmers on a talk. I've heard him say it twice. In 100 years, science will figure it out. Like they're giving themselves, obviously, enough time, even people joke about it. He'll be dead. How convenient. He'll sell his books and then he'll be dead. So he'll never have to live to, why can't they do it in 20? Well, he'll be still alive. He's only my age. Okay, so a causal problem. Okay, now because of these guys, they actually did a very good thing, these property dualists, because of their efforts, a new mind-body problem emerges that was always there, but nobody ever saw it. Okay, and it's the causal problem. So how do those things there? This is from property dualism that admits we have experiences. How do those? This is an exaggeration. That's not really how it looks. It just looks like a bunch of mud. But because electricity doesn't actually light up. That's different. In this idealized version, how do those sparks cause your experience? Okay, so that's the causal problem. All right? And you see the cartoon?
Yeah.
The miracle occurs. That's the causal problem right there. And they make their livelihood giving the miracle high-sounding names, like gives rise to. So they're not saying anything. Again, it's tautologies. Whatever is the cause, it's definitely the thing causing it. We got this wrong because we're really, really smart people, and we analyze things very carefully. The causal problem was there in Cartesian substance dualism, Berkeley's idealism, but was first noticed with them. Now, I just want to read this. Up to the 20th century, people thought with Aristotle, and that requires going back several talks, that by providence or natural order, the purpose of the mind and its organs was to experience. But in materialism, there's no such order. This is explaining why we suddenly see, it's very much like we suddenly saw in Descartes the interaction problem that had been hidden because of Aristotle's glibness. We also, without Aristotle, have to find some kind of mechanics now to explain experience. And they could find none. And so new mind-body problems, notice the causal problem. By the way, this is a joke. I mean, it's an example of a mechanics. These were called Rube Goldberg machines, and they were in cartoons in the 1930s. And the guy plays the flute and that does this, and then ends up doing a very funny task like give him a peanut. So they need to find something like that in materialism to explain consciousness, because they can. They literally, you got to come up with something, and they're not coming up with anything. They're not even trying. And by the way, the whole project really, it's just talk now. Nobody's really trying anything. Okay, so there are three kinds of mind-body problem. I want you to see that. There's the skeptical one. We've been going through this for all these weeks. This is week 6. How do we know there is an external world out there? That's the skeptical problem. Or how do we know our experience is like that world? And that's portrayed in the movie The Matrix. You see that in the movie The Matrix, and many other movies, Total Recall, lots of movies. So the next one is interaction, and that's specific to Descartes. Once you have the interaction that was due when you had You only have an interaction above. Materialism, you give them credit for that. They did get rid of that because they talk about Descartes a lot. You had your experience tree, and you had your real tree that you can't see in the theoretical external world, which you infer from your experience. And there was a problem, as I explained a couple talks ago. How can an immaterial thing push or pull upon a physical thing, and likewise, how are you getting a physical thing to act upon your immaterial mind? Well, because they got rid of the mind, and they kept they don't have an interaction. So that's specific to Descartes. Okay, but the third one is the biggest, and that was just discovered in the 20th century. And it's the biggest problem. And I said that in the first or second talk. I said, but this is the big problem. The big problem is how do you have experience? At least it's a big problem in materialism. And that is how do electrical states in the brain become or give rise to, in their words, experience. Of the three, the causal is the most damning for materialism. There's not even a theory how this happens. There is no theory to go with materialism. Materialism is there's just the external world. Let's avoid the fact that we can't see. Let's not talk. This is like, it's just like close, like as soon as you, external world. If you don't have an internal world, what's an external world? They use, like I said, like what's external to? So I mean, for a while I thought I was dumb, and these guys were smart. That's why I said at the start that materialism is a placeholder name for a hoped-for someday theory. Next week, we'll explain the scientific method and why it cannot help, because remember these were they use scientism, the idea that, well, science is the only way to get at truth, so science will one day be able to explain it, and that's not our job. Our job is to analyze sentences and look at syntax and stuff. They're actually in a crisis to know what their job is now that they don't do anything. Okay, so literally, you can read that in the beginning of almost any history of analytic philosophy. It'll talk about, well, what's the role now of philosophy since we don't do any philosophy? All right, now, this has come up. Somebody said, well, I was waiting for you to talk about Vedanta, and like, well, I don't like all this dualism, in the West. But actually, we've already covered monism in this course. Just some didn't realize it. Hinduism can't help. Were it able, a Hindu would have solved the mind-body problem. No Hindu has. And there's plenty of them at Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard and everywhere, and Stanford, and there are plenty of them. Maya is not new to the West. Okay? It's Plato's cave. Plato's cave is that your sense perception is an illusion, and that the reality is outside the cave, and it's the sun, and it's a unity. That's why the sun symbolizes that it's one. Okay, so we already had that. I forgot what I was going to say. But it was important. Hold on. Maya. I'll explain this more later on in a future talk. I'll come back to this and explain why it cannot help. And I'll also explain next week why science cannot do the things that the scientism people are expecting it. We'll also find out that logic cannot tell us. We'll explain why. We're going to look at it logic. So next week's talk is going to be on the topic of epistemology, because we're not going to go to a place of like hocus pocus, let's just all be rational and just feel that we're not going to be doing that. It's always going to be technical, I'm sorry. But we are going to, but it does become intuitive. Okay, and let's see if I have any more slides. I think next week we'll explain the scientific method, why it can't help. We already have that. Oh, this is my last slide. Neither in idealism nor materialism work. We have now shown that denial of either side of Descartes' mind-body dualism fails. What's left? It's the end of it all, in the sense that every avenue has been tried. Denying the object and denying the subject. Idealism, materialism, dualism all fail to solve the problems that we were talking about in this sense. There's nothing left to try. And then I love the movies, The Lord of the Rings, and this is Frodo at the end when the volcano is blown up and they think they're going to die. And he says, "I'm glad you're with me, Sam, here at the end of all things." So, Jai Baba.
Jai Baba. You know, from listening to you, I understand why
Can you run that so in case she says it? Good.
when I first read God Speaks, when I first came to Baba, it was like wonderful. He was so clear. There was nothing that made me doubt anything. And I knew partway through reading God Speaks, and I'd just come to the center not knowing about him, that my search was over. Because all the rest of the time was full of gobbledygook.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
But I came at it in a different way, in that my father told me that explain God Speaks to me when I was 5 at my bedside, and so I never knew anything else. And I never studied anything except art until I was 40 years old. So when I was hearing what other people think, it was like I was going. I mean, by the way, I could, it was like what I could answer these things from what Baba had said. But that's what we're going to get into. But I wanted to do it this way because this is the end of the history of philosophy. There's no more history to do. But I wanted to do this history. It's necessary because whether you know it or not, and I think some know, you have gained a certain amount of sophistication in an esoteric area of academics, which is philosophy, which is not well understood. 1 or 2 or 3 undergraduate classes will not tell you any of these things. Some of these things were told to me privately by professors, privately, in the office. Okay? The idea that matter is a theoretical entity, that's something you don't say to undergrads. A lot of these things. Okay, but yeah, and the word epistemology, I introduced the word hypostasis earlier, and I've used it a lot. We're going to continue to use it. We're going to talk a lot about epistemology, and next week it's going to be technical again. It'll always be technical, but it won't be what hasn't been introduced in the class, or that you can't go back and it's not technical. But I actually have to show how logic works and why it can't resolve anything, and then exactly how science works and why it cannot resolve anything. And then we'll be really, and I think that'll take half a class, and then we'll be able to start remodeling a new way of. Funny. The last thing I was going to say, end of course, next week we'll begin on a new way of thinking. But actually, we have a little more to cover.
Intuitive thinking?
Well, let me, okay, this course, I came up with this course the day before the first class. So, and I came up with the title really fast, and it was Baba in the Future. But it should have been called Baba for the Future, because the things that I'm going to say are not going to be what people expect me to say. And my talk about intuition will not be familiar. It's what I think Baba means, at least in part. And I'm completely open to, if somebody doesn't like where I go, I think a lot of people won't, I learned from Jamie Newell. I like his language about the shamanic and the priestly. Your own shamanic experience must never be interrupted or confused or distracted or sidetracked by priestly kinds of concerns. Things like explaining somebody's opinion on Baba or something like that. Your path is your path, no matter how strange it might seem to me. And I want to make that really clear. And in fact, I said at the very first off, this isn't for us. We're doing Baba just right. It's all heart. And Bob, and we approach him our own individual way. I think in the future there does need to be a collective new way of seeing the world, which what we're going to talk about. But I'm not going to be talking about intuition like psychic intuition or something like that, or telekinesis or something like that, or psychic healing and I'll show why.
Doesn't that fall into the realm of ESP?
Yes, I would think that. Yes, we're not going to. It's not going to. That was my concern. And also intuition.
Woo-woo.
Yes, okay, it's because intuition also has more than one meaning, as many words do, and it has a poetic meaning too. And I'm completely comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with all of them. I even believe in mother's intuition. My mom, every 100th time, she got it damn right. No. Sometimes it was uncanny, I do. Sometimes I know Megan's going to call me, but that's not what we're going to be talking about. But I'll go into that. That kind of is the talk after next, or even another, because we have to, because we're starting over. We're going to be looking at things so differently that there has to be a kind of re-examination of everything about how we thought. It's not something that's ever been thought of, ever, and I would know. I really would know, because I have a good understanding of Eastern Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta too. By the way, the dualism of Hinduism is sort of a different dualism. It's not the one we're talking about. They're not trying to solve these kinds of experiences, like how we experience the world. Theirs was about soul and God, Atma and Brahman. Atman is Brahman, but that's not. That's it. We're going to. This series, if I can finish it and it goes well, will explain Advaita Vedanta. By using Western words, we're going to arrive at the same place. But we're not going to arrive at it like a doctrine, just a doctrine. See, Indian philosophy is not like ours. There's not all this noodling. They have masters. And they just, you get, Adi Shankara is called a philosopher. He created Advaita Vedanta, which is Atma is Brahma, okay? He created that. It's called non-dualism, or Advaita means not dual. And where did he get the idea? It's in the Bhagavad Gita. So it's not like he did it through reasoning, really. He interpreted not just the Gita, what he called Shruti, or what he felt were the impeccable Vedas. And he put other things aside as questionable and secondary. And these were primary, and he felt they were straight from the source. That literally the sound of the Sanskrit is the truth. Those are the thoughts. That's not like our thinking. But I believe that through our thinking, because of Baba, we actually can arrive at a place that's incredible, but that's the same place, in a more worked out way. Because they don't need to work it out. Indians are not intellectual. They're smart, but they're not. These kinds of things don't really bother them. They can live with a lot more dreamlike imagery and stuff that we used to be able to, but we've kind of lost it. When I say the future, I kind of picture in 20 or 30 years, these clean, good, not on drugs, 17-year-olds that are reading my book and looking, and I'm dead, and they're looking at these, and they're getting excited, and they're Western, and they're probably American, and they're like, this is different. This is something that could be ours. And I think that the West can catch up or even surpass the East in a certain way. It's a funny thing to say, but I think that's why Baba wrote God Speaks in English, and that's why he wrote God Speaks and the discourses. I don't think they're for Indians in Andhra Pradesh. I think that Baba's books are for the West, that we need to now graduate. But we've got to do it our way, because whether we want to deny it or not, it's my opinion. I can say this of myself. We have Western thinking. Okay? I have Western thinking. As much as I can appreciate everything Eastern, and Eastern's a broad word, but I can't be Eastern. I can't see it how they can. I have to see it my way. And I love Berkeley. And I don't love Kant because he was an icky person. Just a quick story about Kant. But I love these people. I love them. I like Bertrand Russell. I love Bertrand Russell. Easy. But anyway, Kant, he would think all the time, and there was a prison near his house, and they would sing songs in the prison in Germany. They would sing. But it disturbed his philosophy. So he was very influential, so he had them stop the singing in the prison.
No.
And that's just mean.
That's pretty nasty.
Yeah. It's like Descartes vivisecting his wife's dog. They're not sure it's true, but it's a story that's told about Descartes. These were nasty. But I don't like Descartes. Creepy. But I like what he did. He did a good thing. Okay, so did you video that? Well, I'm really appreciative. I hope you use the whole thing, because this after, if at the last talk, if people will show up, I want to discuss the whole thing just like this. No talk, no slides, just us sitting around, maybe and talking like with the camera that can get us, because the things that you guys say is very, the two of you especially. Well, I noticed it last week. I mentioned it.
That'd be great.
Yeah, so, and even criticize it. Ask questions, criticize it. Because at this point, I'm pretty excited that this is what I do, and I'm comfortable now, and I don't have any doubts for myself that are going to come up.
Did you prepare this just for us?
Mm-hmm.
Are you going to?
Well, there's a book that I'm following, and it's a manuscript. But my daughter was here, and then it was, frankly, I had so much fun with her and her fiance visiting me that after they left, after like 3 weeks here, I couldn't get back to the book. It was too lonely. It just was, and I had a cold. I was waiting to get over the cold. And I dreaded having to go back to work on, but anyway, the book is right now, it's would publish at 400, it's 100,000 words. It would publish as a 400-page book. And I have been following the book. But I guess what I meant by I prepared these PowerPoints each week. But I do them in consultation with my book.
I think we ought to send a link to your talks to all the philosophy departments.
Well, let's wait till they're done, make sure that I can succeed. But, I could get to the end, and
That's a great idea.
I thought this was going to make sense, and I see it doesn't really make any sense. I mean, really, it could happen. I hope not.
No, you know who's in charge.
Baba.
Of course.
Yeah. If Baba wanted, I don't think he'd waste this much resources on just humiliating me again, because that's so much easier to do in other ways.
You never know.
You never know. Knock on wood.
But up to this point, you've given a really understandable, comprehensive history of how philosophy has dead-ended itself, and it's really.
Yeah, it's nice.
I mean, I never would have gotten
No,
that.
people don't even know what materialism is.
Yeah.
I mean, they think it's,
I took
oh, well,
philosophy
all that
classes
exists
and
is
I
what
never
we
got
see.
these.
Well, actually, that's not materialism, because it's actually that the only thing that exists is the invisible external world that nobody can understand. It doesn't even make any sense.
But you linked them all together. I took philosophy classes. They never tied it together and
Neither
showed
did
how
I.
it progressed.
No.
I mean, and they never.
It's all
they
disjointed.
didn't- Yeah, they didn't. They didn't do a lot of stuff.
No, I took them too, and they didn't. And you know, I went my first 6 months studying philosophy. I was in so much pain.
Uh,
It was after the 6-month part, and I was in so much pain, just confused, just so confused that I was like going quietly to different professors and admitting the stress. But then that's just like a little while later, and suddenly I had this experience. I was like, wait a minute, I get this. I'm good at this. That's actually like, but there was that moment of crisis where I was like, I don't know what's going on. So it's hard to get, but now it's all very clear and simple.